The flashing red and blue lights cut through the quiet night. A black SUV rolls to a stop on a narrow stretch of highway outside of Washington, D.C. The driver, a woman in her late 40s, takes a slow breath, her fingers tightening briefly around the steering wheel. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Warren, director of the FBI. But tonight, she isn't a powerful official walking into a press conference or commanding agents in a crisis. Tonight, she's just a woman driving home after a long day at headquarters, still in her dark suit, her badge tucked inside her purse. A police cruiser screeches to a halt behind her. Two officers step out. One is tall, broad-shouldered, his jaw tight with hostility. The other lingers behind, nervous but silent. The tall officer approaches quickly, hand resting on his holstered weapon. Elizabeth lowers her window. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" The man sneers. "Step out of the vehicle. Now!" Elizabeth blinks. "Excuse me? May I ask what the— Out!" His voice is sharp, cutting through the night air. His hand twitches near his gun. Elizabeth keeps her voice calm. "Officer, I'm the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have my credentials." But before she can reach for her purse, he yanks the door open. "Hands where I can see them!" he shouts, drawing his weapon fully now. The second officer shifts uncomfortably, glancing at passing cars that slow to watch. Elizabeth steps out carefully, her hands raised. The barrel of his gun follows her every move. "This is unnecessary," she says evenly. "You're making a mistake." The tall officer circles her like a predator. "Mistake? You think you're above the law because of your fancy car and your suit? You people always think you can do whatever you want." Elizabeth's eyes narrow. She has seen arrogance before, in criminals, in corrupt officials, in men who mistake cruelty for power. "I assure you," she says, her tone measured, "no one is above the law. Least of all me. But the law also applies to you." Her words only enrage him further. "Shut up!" he snaps, pressing the muzzle of his gun closer to her chest. Drivers passing by gasp, some holding up phones to record. A crowd begins to form near the roadside. The second officer finally speaks, his voice shaking. "Mark, maybe we should—" "Stay out of this!" Mark barks, never taking his eyes off Elizabeth. "She's hiding something. I can feel it." Elizabeth keeps her gaze steady, her voice quiet but strong. "You're pointing a loaded weapon at an unarmed federal official without cause. Do you understand the consequences of what you're doing right now?" Mark smirks. "The only consequence is you spending the night in jail." But just then, one of the bystanders steps closer, phone raised high. "She just said she's the FBI director," the man yells. "You're holding the FBI director at gunpoint." The crowd murmurs, whispers turning into shocked exclamations. Phones flash, cameras roll, and within seconds the scene begins streaming live online. Elizabeth doesn't move. She knows what's coming. The second officer's face drains of color. He looks at Mark in horror. "Director? She's right. That's Elizabeth Warren. I've seen her on TV. Briefings, hearings." "Oh my God, Mark, put the gun down." Mark hesitates, confusion flickering across his face. The crowd chants now, voices growing louder. "Put the gun down! Put the gun down!" Elizabeth lowers her hands slightly, her tone sharp but controlled. "Officer Mark, you need to holster your weapon immediately. This ends now." But Mark shakes his head violently, panic overtaking arrogance. "No, no, you're bluffing. You're just—" Blue lights flash again, this time from unmarked SUVs screeching onto the scene. Doors slam, and within seconds, armed federal agents pour out, their weapons trained on the officer. "Drop your gun!" one shouts. "Now!" Mark freezes, caught between pride and fear. His weapon trembles in his hands. Elizabeth doesn't flinch. She stands tall, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You are finished, officer. Lower your weapon before you add another crime to the list." The second officer immediately drops his hands, stepping back, but Mark lingers a moment longer, before finally, reluctantly, lowering his gun. The agents swarm him instantly, forcing him to the ground, cuffing him in front of the crowd. Phones capture every second. Within minutes, the video is already spreading online. Racist cop holds FBI director at gunpoint, gets arrested on the spot. Elizabeth adjusts her blazer, retrieving her badge from her purse at last. She holds it up for the stunned onlookers to see, her voice steady. "My name is Dr. Elizabeth Warren. I am the director of the FBI, and this officer has just disgraced his badge." The crowd erupts in gasps, cheers, and shouts. The second officer covers his face in shame. Mark thrashes against his cuffs, screaming, but the agents drag him toward the SUV without a word. Elizabeth steps back into her car, her composure unshaken. As she drives away, she knows this night is only the beginning. The fallout will be massive. Because arrogance thought a gun could strip her of dignity, but instead, it stripped a corrupt officer of his badge. By dawn, the video of the traffic stop has already gone viral. Every major network plays the footage on a loop. The moment Officer Mark shoves his gun toward Elizabeth Warren, the stunned gasp from the crowd, and the swift arrival of federal agents who take him down in seconds. The caption scrolling across the screen reads, "Police officer holds FBI director at gunpoint, immediate arrest." Elizabeth sits at her desk inside the Hoover building, sipping black coffee. Her phone buzzes relentlessly. Messages from senators, governors, even international allies. Headlines flash across her laptop. FBI director targeted in shocking traffic stop. Officer disgraced as video of racist encounter spreads worldwide. America reacts. No one is above the law, not even those who enforce it. Angela Reed, her deputy director, bursts into the office, her face pale. "Ma'am, the Attorney General is on line 1. The White House wants a full report before noon." Elizabeth sets her mug down. "Then they'll get one. But first, we need to ensure this doesn't become just another headline people forget in 2 days. This is about more than me. It's about accountability." Angela nods, flipping open a folder. Internal Affairs has already suspended Mark without pay. The chief of his precinct has called twice. He's begging to handle this quietly, off the record. Elizabeth's eyes narrow. Quietly? He pointed a loaded weapon at a federal official on camera in front of witnesses. The time for quiet is over. Across town, Officer Mark sits in a holding cell, still fuming. He pounds the metal bench with his fists, muttering, "She provoked me. She thought she was better than me. I was just doing my job." But even he knows those excuses won't save him. His badge has already been stripped, his name plastered across every news outlet. At a nearby diner, the conversation is electric. Patrons crowd around a small TV mounted on the wall, watching the footage again. A young woman shakes her head. That officer didn't even hesitate, gun out before she said a word. An older man replies, "And she stayed calm the whole time. If that were me, I'd be shaking in my boots. She's tougher than half the men I know." The waitress sets down plates of eggs and coffee. "Tougher than all of them," she mutters. "That's why she's the director." Back at FBI headquarters, Elizabeth steps into a press briefing room packed with reporters. The buzz of cameras fills the air. She takes her place at the podium, hands resting firmly on the sides. "Last night," she begins, her voice steady, "I was pulled over by a police officer who chose arrogance over duty, hostility over professionalism. He drew his weapon without cause. He held me at gunpoint, and he made a decision that cost him his badge." The room is silent, reporters scribbling furiously. Elizabeth continues, "This is not about me. This is about the American people, about every driver who has been treated unfairly, about every person who has faced the barrel of a gun for no reason. Last night proved one thing: accountability cannot be optional. It must be absolute." The silence breaks into a flurry of shouted questions. "Director Warren, do you believe this was racially motivated?" one asks. Elizabeth meets his gaze evenly. The video speaks for itself. The behavior speaks for itself, and the consequences will speak louder than both. Her words flash across screens within minutes. Hashtags trend online. No one above the law. Accountability. Now. Vigils spark in several cities, with citizens holding candles not in protest, but in solidarity with the principle she voiced. Meanwhile, Officer Mark's fellow officers distance themselves quickly. A captain tells reporters, "One man's arrogance doesn't represent the badge, but he will face the full weight of justice." At the farm in Virginia where she retreats on weekends, Elizabeth finds a moment of quiet that evening. She sits on the porch, journal in hand. She writes, "Power without restraint becomes weakness. Last night, arrogance mistook cruelty for strength, but dignity stood taller, and dignity will always outlast arrogance." Angela calls with an update. "Ma'am, the Senate Judiciary Committee wants you to testify next week. They want your perspective on police accountability reform." Elizabeth closes her journal. "Then that's what they'll get. If they want a story, I'll give them the truth." Because arrogance thought a gun could silence her. But instead, it gave her a louder voice, and the whole world was listening. The Senate Judiciary Committee chamber is packed, cameras lining every corner. Senators shuffle papers, aides whisper nervously, and the public gallery overflows with citizens eager to witness what has already been called the most important hearing on accountability in a generation. Elizabeth Warren, dressed in a sharp navy suit, walks calmly into the room. Her presence alone quiets the chatter. She places a folder on the table, adjusts the microphone, and lifts her gaze to the panel. The chair of the committee, Senator Hayes, clears his throat. Director Warren, thank you for appearing on such short notice. We all know why you're here. Elizabeth nods. Yes, Senator. Last week an officer pulled me over, drew his weapon, and held me at gunpoint for no cause. That moment was not unique. What was unique was that it happened to me, and it was caught on video. Countless others have faced similar treatment without the shield of cameras or the protection of a title. That's why I'm here. Her words ripple through the chamber. Senators lean forward, pens poised. Reporters type furiously. Senator Morales, a longtime advocate for reform, speaks next. Director Warren, in your opinion, what failed that night? The officer, the system, or both? Elizabeth meets his eyes. Both. The officer failed in his duty to protect and serve, but the system enabled his arrogance, shielded his behavior, and allowed him to believe he could act without consequence. That is why we need reform. Not just punishment for individuals, but prevention of systemic abuse. Gasps ripple through the audience. The phrase systemic abuse flashes across news tickers within minutes. Another senator, skeptical and stern, interrupts. Director Warren, some say your experience is being exaggerated because of your position. How do we know this isn't just political theater? Elizabeth leans closer to the microphone, her tone sharp. Senator, if this is theater, then the stage is littered with the lives of those who never made it home from a traffic stop. I assure you, there's nothing theatrical about staring down the barrel of a gun when you've done nothing wrong. The room goes silent. Even the skeptical senator shifts uncomfortably. Outside the chamber, protesters hold candles and signs reading, "No one above the law" and "Accountability now." The hearing is live-streamed to millions. Families gather in living rooms, offices, even classrooms to watch. The nation hangs on her every word. Back at FBI headquarters, Angela Reed watches from a conference room, pride in her eyes. She's not just testifying, she whispers to a colleague. She's teaching. Meanwhile, Officer Mark sits in his cell, watching the hearing on a small TV bolted to the wall. His face reddens as Elizabeth's calm words echo through the speakers. "She's destroying me," he mutters bitterly. Another inmate chuckles. "No, man, you destroyed yourself. She's just telling the world." As the hearing continues, Elizabeth presents data. Statistics on racial profiling, videos of misconduct, testimonies from families who lost loved ones. Each piece builds her case. Accountability is not optional, it is essential. When she finishes, the chamber erupts in applause, not the usual polite clapping of politics, but raw human applause from the gallery. Cameras capture it, broadcast it, and within hours, clips of the hearing dominate social media. Hashtags trend, accountability, now, dignity, over arrogance. Later that evening, Elizabeth steps out of the Capitol into the cool night air. Reporters swarm, microphones thrust forward. One asks, "Director Warren, do you think today will actually lead to change?" She pauses, then answers firmly. Change doesn't come from one day or one speech. Change comes when people refuse to bow to fear and demand dignity instead. Today was one step. The next is up to all of us. Her words play on evening news broadcasts across the country. Families nod, children repeat her phrases, and cities light candles in solidarity. Back at the farm retreat that weekend, Elizabeth sits on the porch with Angela. The stars glow overhead, cicadas humming in the fields. Angela pours tea and sighs. "You realize you've become more than director of the FBI, right? You're a symbol now." Elizabeth gazes at the flickering candle on the table. Symbols don't matter unless they spark action. If I'm a symbol, then my job isn't to shine, it's to light others. Angela smiles faintly. "You've lit a whole nation, Elizabeth." Elizabeth picks up her journal and writes, "They tried to silence me with fear, but fear amplified my voice. They tried to strip me of dignity, but dignity multiplied. This isn't just my fight, it's ours, and ours cannot be stopped. Because arrogance thought one gun could end her story, but instead it began a movement, and the world was already marching. The hearing echoes across the nation for days. Elizabeth Warren's words, "Change doesn't come from one day or one speech," are replayed on every major channel, quoted in editorials, and printed on handmade signs at rallies. In Atlanta, a mother tells her teenage son while watching the replay, "That's what courage looks like. Not the gun in his hand, but the strength in her voice." In Los Angeles, college students gather in the quad, holding candles and chanting "Accountability now." In Chicago, church bells ring at dusk as congregations light candles in solidarity. Elizabeth herself feels the weight of this movement pressing down on her shoulders. Inside her office at FBI headquarters, Angela sets down a stack of reports. The calls haven't stopped. Governors want meetings. Civil rights groups want partnerships. International leaders want to know how you stayed so calm with a gun in your face. Elizabeth exhales, rubbing her temples. "I didn't stay calm because I wanted to. I stayed calm because panic would have given him power. Fear feeds arrogance, Angela. Dignity starves it." Meanwhile, Officer Mark's case moves quickly through the courts. His arraignment draws a crowd of protesters and reporters. Some chant angrily for justice, while others shout in defense of law enforcement. Mark stands in handcuffs, his face hard, refusing to meet the cameras. The judge sets bail high, citing the seriousness of his offense. Back at the precinct, morale crumbles. Officers whisper in hallways, some ashamed, others furious that one man's arrogance has stained them all. A young rookie mutters, "He held the director of the FBI at gunpoint. What chance did the rest of us ever have to defend that?" The captain slams his hand on the desk. "We don't defend that. We own it. We fix it." Newsrooms buzz with opinion pieces. One headline in the Washington Post reads, "When arrogance pulls the trigger, dignity holds the line." A commentator on a late-night show tells viewers, "This wasn't just about one officer or one director. This was about the country deciding who really holds power, fear or dignity." Elizabeth tries to focus on her work, but her personal life is not immune. At her Virginia farm retreat, neighbors stop by with casseroles, candles, and handwritten notes. One elderly woman presses Elizabeth's hands, tears in her eyes. "You stood for all of us that night. Thank you." Elizabeth accepts the words graciously, but writes in her journal later, "It wasn't bravery, it was necessity. If I had bowed, arrogance would have claimed victory, and victory, once given, is hard to take back." Angela urges her to slow down, but Elizabeth refuses. "This isn't the time to step back. The fire is lit, Angela. Now we have to keep it burning." Meanwhile, across the country, candlelight vigils swell into massive gatherings. In New York, Times Square is filled with thousands holding candles, their flames reflected on giant billboards. In Dallas, veterans stand shoulder to shoulder with families, chanting, "No one above the law." The movement spreads like wildfire, unstoppable. But in darker corners, resentment festers. Online forums buzz with anger, calling Elizabeth a liar and a tyrant. A handful of extremists vow revenge. The FBI monitors closely, but Elizabeth knows the threats are real. One night, Angela confronts her in the office. "Ma'am, these people are serious. They're not just tweeting, they're planning." Elizabeth's response is firm. "Then let them plan. Fear always plans, but dignity always endures." The following week, Elizabeth is invited to speak at Georgetown University. The auditorium overflows. Students, professors, community leaders all packed shoulder to shoulder. She walks to the podium, candlelight projected on the screen behind her. "Some people still ask me why I didn't panic that night," she begins. "The truth is, I wanted to. But I knew that fear would not save me. Only resolve would. That's true for all of us. Fear doesn't protect. Dignity does." The students rise to their feet, applauding. Phones record her every word. Hashtags trend again. Fear doesn't protect, #dignity does. Back at her farm that weekend, Elizabeth sits quietly on the porch, the stars glowing above. Marcus, an old friend and retired Marine, joins her with 2 mugs of coffee. "Liz, you realize what you've done, right? You turned a traffic stop into a movement. That doesn't happen every day." Elizabeth smiles faintly. "Movements don't start with speeches or cameras. They start when someone refuses to bow. That night I just refused." Marcus chuckles. "And now a whole country refuses with you." Elizabeth opens her journal and writes, "Arrogance pulled a trigger, but it fired nothing. Dignity answered instead. And its echo is louder than bullets. Because arrogance thought a weapon could define the night, but dignity defined the future. The passage of days only deepens the storm. Elizabeth Warren is no longer just the director of the FBI, she has become a symbol. Every speech she gives, every word she speaks, ripples across the country. In Detroit, thousands march with candles, chanting her phrases. In Denver, families hold vigils on courthouse steps. In Miami, students organize rallies with banners that read, "Dignity protects, fear does not." The movement has escaped her hands and grown into something unstoppable. Elizabeth sits in her office at FBI headquarters, watching live footage of these gatherings. Angela enters with a tablet, eyes wide. "Ma'am, the numbers are staggering. More than 30 million people have tuned in to last night's vigil online. 30 million. It's bigger than anything we've ever seen." Elizabeth exhales, folding her hands. "Good, but it can't stop at vigils. People need more than candles. They need change." Angela nods. "The Senate vote on the accountability reform package is next month. They're already citing your testimony as the turning point." Meanwhile, Officer Mark's trial looms closer. His lawyers attempt to paint him as a man under pressure, a victim of circumstance. But the footage tells another story. A gun raised, arrogance on full display, and dignity refusing to bow. Public opinion is clear. His career is over, and justice is inevitable. In a small cafe across town, two young women watch the trial coverage on TV. One says softly, "If she hadn't been the director, she might not have survived." The other nods, tears brimming. "That's why she matters. She stood for all of us that night." Back at headquarters, Elizabeth prepares for another press briefing. Reporters crowd the room, their questions sharp. One asks, "Director Warren, do you believe this moment is bigger than the FBI itself?" Elizabeth's gaze is steady. "This moment is not about one agency or one official. It is about the people. It is about every citizen who deserves dignity when they encounter the law. The badge should protect, not threaten." Her words spread instantly. Hashtags trending. The badge should protect, #dignity for all. But even as the movement swells, the threats grow louder. FBI intelligence intercepts chatter on extremist forums. Talk of teaching the director a lesson, of Phase 2. Brooks, head of counterterrorism, storms into her office. "Ma'am, they're planning something bigger. We can't let you keep walking into these vigils unprotected." Elizabeth leans back in her chair, her expression calm. "Brooks, fear has been trying to teach me lessons my whole life, and every time, dignity has been the better teacher." Brooks slams a folder on her desk. "With respect, Director, this isn't philosophy, it's life or death. You are the most targeted official in the country right now." Elizabeth meets his eyes firmly. "Then let them target me, because every attempt they make proves our point. Arrogance falls, dignity rises." That night, Riverton Plaza glows again. Tens of thousands fill the square, their candles swaying in the breeze. Families chant, choirs sing, and reporters beam the scene to millions watching worldwide. Elizabeth steps onto the stage. The crowd hushes, her presence commanding silence. She raises her candle, her voice cutting through the night. "They pointed a gun at me, but they could not silence me. They raised their voices against me, but they could not drown out ours. They threatened fear, but fear has already lost. What remains is this: our light, our unity, our dignity." The crowd roars. Candles lift high, chants echo like thunder. "Fear never wins, fear never wins." But even as the cheers fill the air, shadows linger. In a dark basement across the city, masked figures huddle, their eyes fixed on a live stream of the vigil. One mutters, "She's turning the whole country against us. We can't let this stand." Another slams his fist on the table. "Phase 2, we make her pay." Back at her farm retreat later that night, Elizabeth sits on the porch, the candlelight flickering beside her. Angela joins her, worry etched on her face. "You keep saying fear never wins. But what if one day it does?" Elizabeth gazes at the stars. "Then dignity will rise from the ground where it falls." That's the truth they'll never understand. This isn't about me, it's about us, and us cannot be broken. She opens her journal and writes, "They tried to aim fear at me, but fear misfired. Dignity answered, and dignity always wins." Because arrogance thought one trial, one gun, one night could stop her. But instead, it started a movement, and the movement was only getting louder. The nation buzzes as the trial of Officer Mark officially begins. Reporters line the courthouse steps, cameras flash with every passing official, and protesters gather outside holding candles in broad daylight. On one side, chants of "No one above the law" ring out. On the other, a small but loud group shouts in defense of law enforcement. Inside the courtroom, Elizabeth Warren sits at the witness table, her posture straight, her face calm. She isn't here as the director of the FBI, but as a victim of misconduct. Across from her, Mark avoids her eyes, his jaw clenched tight. The prosecutor rises. "Director Warren, can you recount the events of that night for the court?" Elizabeth's voice is steady, each word clear. She describes the flashing lights, the officer's sneer, the moment his gun was thrust into her chest. She recalls the crowd's gasps, the live stream, and the arrival of federal agents who took him down. "And how did you respond?" the prosecutor asks. "I stayed calm," she says simply, "because panic would have given him power. Dignity was the only shield I had, and it was stronger than his weapon." The courtroom murmurs. Reporters type furiously. Mark's defense attorney tries to paint him as overworked, stressed, and unfairly targeted. "My client believed he was facing a threat. He acted as any officer might." Elizabeth's gaze hardens. "Any officer who acts as he did has no business wearing a badge. A gun is not a tool for arrogance. It is a responsibility. He forgot that, and he disgraced the uniform." The judge bangs the gavel to quiet the applause that erupts from the gallery. Outside, the words spread instantly. Hashtag surge again. Hashtag dignity. As a shield. Hashtag badge, not weapon. Meanwhile, at FBI headquarters, Angela monitors the trial coverage, her phone buzzing nonstop. She tells her team, "This isn't just about one officer. This is about the culture that allowed him to believe he could get away with it." Brooks enters with a grim expression. And while she's in that courtroom, extremists online are plotting again. They're calling it Phase 2, and this time, they're threatening to disrupt the trial itself. Angela's eyes widen. "Here? In D.C.? Brooks nods. "We've tightened security, but they're desperate. Desperation makes them reckless." Back at the courthouse, Elizabeth exits after her testimony. Reporters swarm, microphones thrust forward. One asks, "Director Warren, what do you hope comes from this trial?" She pauses at the top of the courthouse steps, the sunlight glinting off her badge clipped to her belt. "I hope for justice. Not just for me, but for every citizen who has felt powerless in the face of arrogance. This case is not about a title. It is about dignity. And dignity belongs to all of us." The crowd erupts in cheers, candles raised even in the daytime. That night, Riverton Plaza glows brighter than ever. Tens of thousands gather, their chants echoing into the night sky. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her candle raised. "They put me on the stand today, but I was not alone. Every one of you was with me. Every family who has faced injustice, every child who has felt fear instead of safety. You were with me, and together we will prove again that dignity does not bow." The chants rise louder. "Dignity does not bow. Dignity does not bow." But in a shadowy basement nearby, masked figures huddle around screens, fury in their eyes. "She's turning the country against us," one growls. Another slams his fist. "Phase 2, we hit them where it hurts." Back at the farm later that night, Elizabeth sits on the porch, Angela by her side. The candle between them flickers softly. Angela whispers, "I worry every time you step out there. One day they might get what they want." Elizabeth shakes her head. "They'll never get what they want. Because even if they strike me down, dignity will rise stronger. That's the truth they'll never kill." She opens her journal and writes, "A trial is not the end. It is a mirror. And in this mirror, arrogance sees its own fall. Dignity sees its reflection and multiplies. Because arrogance thought a courtroom could bend the truth. But instead, the truth bent arrogance until it broke." The second week of the trial begins, and the courthouse feels less like a legal proceeding and more like the center of a nation's attention. Lines of citizens wrap around the block, some holding candles in daylight, others waving signs that read, "Dignity for all, and no badge above the law." Elizabeth Warren arrives under heavy security, though her calm composure never wavers. The crowd cheers as she walks up the courthouse steps, her presence like a steady flame. Inside, the tension is palpable. The prosecution calls more witnesses, experts on police procedure, community members who have faced misconduct, even officers who testify that Mark's behavior violated every rule in the book. One retired police chief says flatly, "The badge is a shield, not a sword. He turned it into a weapon, and that dishonors us all." Mark glares from the defense table, his fists clenched. His lawyer tries to paint Elizabeth as grandstanding, but the footage of the incident plays on the courtroom screens. The silence is heavy as the moment replays. The officer's gun pressed toward her chest, the crowd screaming, Elizabeth standing unflinching. The jury watches, wide-eyed. The prosecutor's voice cuts through the silence. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not policing. That is arrogance with a badge. Outside, the vigil grows louder. Thousands gather each evening, their chants shaking the plaza. Fear never wins. Dignity always rises. The live streams reach millions. Families across the nation watch together, some with tears in their eyes. Back at FBI headquarters, Brooks briefs Angela. We intercepted chatter. Extremist remnants are planning a disruption at tonight's vigil. They're calling it Phase 2, Chaos in the Plaza. Angela pales. Have you told the director? Brooks shakes his head. She'll refuse extra security if we do. But we can't let this spiral out of control. Meanwhile, Elizabeth finishes another day of testimony and steps out to greet the waiting crowd. Microphones flash, reporters lean in. One asks, Director Warren, do you believe justice will prevail? Elizabeth pauses, scanning the faces around her. Justice is not a gift given by a courtroom. Justice is a choice made by a people. This trial is not about me. It's about whether we, as a nation, choose dignity over arrogance. And I believe we will. The crowd cheers. Hashtags trend again. Choose dignity. Justice. I's a choice. That night, Riverton Plaza fills once more. Families gather shoulder to shoulder, their candles glowing like a sea of stars. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her flame raised high. They tried to silence us with a gun, she begins. They tried to scare us with arrogance. But look around. Do you see fear here? No, the crowd roars. Do you see silence here? Never. Then tonight we show them again. Fear fails, arrogance falls, dignity rises. The chants echo through the night, but as the cheers swell, smoke suddenly bursts near the edge of the crowd. Panic ripples, children cry. A group of masked figures shout obscenities, hurling canisters to spread chaos. Brooks and his agents react instantly, moving in with precision. Veterans in the crowd lock arms, guiding families away from the smoke. The disruption lasts less than a minute before the agitators are tackled and dragged away. Elizabeth doesn't move from the stage. She raises her candle higher, her voice cutting through the haze. You see, they tried again. They tried smoke, they tried chaos. But what happened? The crowd steadies, chants rising stronger than before. Fear never wins! Fear never wins! Elizabeth smiles faintly. That's right, fear failed again. And every time it fails, our light grows brighter. Phones capture the moment, live streams exploding online. Headlines by morning read, Phase 2 fails. Dignity stronger than ever. At the farm that night, Angela confronts her, trembling. You could have been hurt. You don't even flinch when they try to tear everything apart. How do you do it? Elizabeth sets her candle on the porch railing, watching it flicker. Because I know what they don't. Fear is fragile. Dignity is unbreakable. She opens her journal and writes, They threw smoke, but smoke clears. They shouted chaos, but chaos fades. What remains is dignity, and dignity endures. Because arrogance thought it could poison the night, but instead the night shone brighter. The morning after the smoke attack at Riverton Plaza, the footage dominates every screen. Clips show Elizabeth Warren standing tall, candle raised, while chaos briefly erupts around her. Commentators call it the moment dignity cut through the haze. In New York, commuters watch the replay on subway screens. A woman whispers to her daughter, See, that's what courage looks like. In Texas, families share the video around dinner tables, murmuring that maybe, just maybe, things are finally changing. Elizabeth herself sits in her office, watching the replay with Angela. Angela shakes her head. You didn't even blink, not once. Do you understand what that looks like to the rest of the world? Elizabeth sips her coffee, unfazed. It looks like what it was. Smoke. Smoke clears, that's all. Meanwhile, Brooks storms in, files under his arm. Director, we've identified the group behind last night's stunt. They're remnants of the same extremists we've been tracking. They called it Phase 2. They'll keep trying. Elizabeth meets his eyes. Then we'll keep showing them that failure is all they'll ever get. At the courthouse, Mark's trial grinds on. Witness after witness testifies against him. Experts dismantle his defense, and video evidence plays again and again. Jurors watch the footage, their expressions hardening with each replay. The prosecutor's closing argument rings clear. This is not just about an officer who lost control. This is about arrogance that believed it was untouchable, and this trial is our chance to say, it is not. Outside, vigils swell. Families chant, "No badge above the law." While holding candles high, the courthouse becomes a beacon, its steps glowing with light every night. Inside the FBI, agents notice something remarkable. Public trust in the Bureau is rising for the first time in years. Surveys show a surge of confidence, fueled by Elizabeth's calm defiance and her refusal to let arrogance win. At home on her Virginia farm, Elizabeth finds a rare moment of quiet. She walks the fields at dusk, the cicadas humming, the air thick with summer heat. Angela joins her, a lantern in hand. "You know," Angela says softly, "I used to think you carried all this because you had to. Now I realize you carry it because you choose to." Elizabeth smiles faintly. "We don't choose the battles, Angela, but we do choose how we fight them. I chose dignity." The following Friday, Riverton Plaza fills again. Families arrive early, children clutching candles, veterans standing shoulder to shoulder. Reporters broadcast live, drones capturing the vast sea of lights. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her presence commanding silence. She raises her candle, her voice strong. "They tried smoke, they tried chaos, they tried to break us, but what did we do? Stood tall!" The crowd roars. "They said fear would win, but what do we say? Fear never wins." That's right. Fear never wins. Dignity always rises. And tonight, we rise again. The chants thunder, shaking the plaza. Hashtags trend instantly. #fear never wins, #rise again. But in a dark basement across town, masked figures huddle over maps. One growls, "Smoke didn't work, noise didn't work. Next time, we go bigger." Phase 3. Back on the stage, Elizabeth senses the weight of what's still to come. She doesn't flinch. She raises her candle higher. This isn't about one night or one plaza. This is about a nation choosing light over darkness. We will not bow, we will not break, and we will not stop. The crowd erupts, chants echoing into the night sky. Later at her farm, Elizabeth writes in her journal, "They keep giving their phases numbers. I keep giving mine a name, dignity. Their numbers will run out. My name will not." Angela reads over her shoulder and whispers, "You make it sound so simple." Elizabeth closes the journal gently. It is simple. Fear complicates. Dignity clarifies. Because arrogance thought smoke could cloud the night, but dignity lit it brighter than ever. The courthouse is silent as the jury files back into the room. Weeks of testimony, hours of video replay, and the weight of a nation's eyes all hang in the air. Elizabeth Warren sits in the front row, her hands folded neatly, her expression calm but unyielding. The judge clears his throat. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stands, paper trembling slightly in her hands. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of misconduct while in uniform, guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, guilty." Gasps ripple through the courtroom. Reporters scribble furiously. Mark slams his fists on the table, his face twisted in rage. "This is a setup! I was doing my job!" he shouts, but the bailiffs restrain him quickly. Elizabeth doesn't react outwardly, but inside she feels the weight of justice settling. Not just for her, but for every citizen who had ever faced arrogance disguised as authority. Outside the courthouse, the news spreads like wildfire. Crowds waiting on the steps erupt into cheers. Families lift candles high, chanting, "No badge above the law, no badge above the law." News anchors call it a landmark verdict. Editorials praise the jury for sending a clear message. One headline reads, "Arrogance convicted, dignity vindicated." At FBI headquarters, Angela bursts into Elizabeth's office with tears in her eyes. "It's over. He's guilty on all counts." Elizabeth looks up from her paperwork, her face steady. "Good. But remember, Angela, this wasn't about one man losing his badge. This was about a nation reclaiming its dignity." Brooks enters, his tone grim. "Director, while the trial is done, our work isn't. Extremist groups are furious. They're calling the verdict proof of a conspiracy. Phase 3 is already in their chatter." Elizabeth sets her pen down, eyes narrowing. "Then let them call it whatever they want. We'll answer the same way we always have, by standing." That night, Riverton Plaza swells with the largest crowd yet. Tens of thousands gather, candles lighting the square like a galaxy of stars. Families cheer as Elizabeth steps onto the stage. They said the badge made him untouchable, she begins, her candle raised high. But today, justice proved otherwise. Today, a jury of ordinary citizens said no one is above the law. Today, dignity stood taller than arrogance. The crowd roars, chants echo. Dignity stands, fear never wins, Elizabeth continues. But make no mistake, this is not the end. There are still those who believe fear can silence us, who believe chaos can scatter us. They whisper about phases, about finales. But here is the truth. Phases end. Dignity does not. The chants thunder louder, live streams reaching millions across the world. Hashtag surge, #dignity stands, #phases end. In a shadowy warehouse on the city's edge, masked figures watch the broadcast on a flickering screen. One slams his fist. She's mocking us. Every word she says is a knife. Another growls, then we sharpen ours. Phase 3 won't be smoke or noise. It'll be fire. Back at the farm that evening, Elizabeth writes in her journal, the candlelight flickering across the page. Justice was served today, but arrogance doesn't die in a courtroom. It dies when dignity outnumbers it, outlasts it, outshines it. That work is not done. Angela sits beside her, worry in her eyes. Every time you speak, the movement grows. But so do the threats. Aren't you afraid? Elizabeth closes the journal gently. Of course I'm afraid. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's refusing to bow to it. She looks out at the dark horizon, where the first stars pierce the sky. They think their phases make them stronger. But every phase they launch only proves the same thing, that dignity rises higher than arrogance can reach. Because arrogance thought a guilty verdict would silence the movement, but instead it amplified it, louder, stronger, unstoppable. The guilty verdict reverberates across the country like a bell tolling in the night. News outlets call it a turning point in accountability. Candlelight vigils double in size, springing up in cities far from Washington. In Boston, families gather outside the State House chanting, "Phases end, dignity stands." In Phoenix, high school students hold candles in their football stadium, their voices echoing into the desert sky. But with celebration comes unease. FBI intelligence reports a disturbing uptick in online chatter. Extremist groups, enraged by the verdict, vow retaliation. They call it Phase 3, and unlike the smoke and chaos of earlier attempts, their rhetoric now promises destruction. Inside her office, Elizabeth Warren reads the report silently, her face composed but her eyes sharp. Brooks briefs her with urgency. "Ma'am, they're planning something bigger. We don't know when or where, but they're calling it fire for fire." Angela slams her notebook shut. "You can't keep putting yourself in the middle of this. Every rally, every vigil, you're a target painted in neon." Elizabeth sets the file down. "Angela, they've been aiming at me since the night of that traffic stop, but every time they miss, dignity grows stronger. That's why they keep trying. That's why I keep standing." Brooks mutters, "But one day they might not miss." Elizabeth meets his gaze firmly. "Then if I fall, it will be proof of what I've said all along. Fear kills itself trying to kill dignity, and dignity always rises." The following Friday, Riverton Plaza prepares for another vigil. Flyers call it the Vigil of a Nation. Families travel from across states, buses lining the streets. Veterans stand ready, candles distributed by volunteers. Reporters predict it will be the largest gathering yet, a visible stand against fear. Elizabeth arrives under heavy security. As she steps onto the stage, the crowd hushes instantly. Candles flicker like stars across the square. She lifts hers high, her voice strong. "They convicted arrogance in a courtroom last week. But tonight, we convict fear in the open air. Fear told us we would scatter, but look around. Are we scattered? No, the crowd roars. Fear told us we would bow, but do we bow? Never. Then tonight we rise again, not as one, but as millions. And millions cannot be silenced." The chants thunder. Millions cannot be silenced. Fear never wins. The livestream count surges past 20 million viewers worldwide. Hashtags trend. Millions, rise. Hashtag fear convicted. But in the shadows beyond the plaza, vans idle. Inside, masked figures prepare canisters, their faces hidden behind scarves. One snarls, "If smoke didn't break them, if noise didn't scare them, fire will." Back on stage, Elizabeth continues, her candle unwavering. "Every time they try, they fail. Every time they plan, they crumble, because their strength is in fear, and fear cannot outlast dignity. Suddenly, explosions of flame erupt near the edge of the plaza, Molotov cocktails hurled from the vans. The crowd screams, panic rippling as fire licks the night air. Children cry, parents clutch them tightly. Brooks yells into his radio, "Phase 3 initiated! Move! Move!" Agents swarm, veterans form lines, firefighters rush forward with extinguishers. Chaos teeters at the edge of the plaza. Elizabeth doesn't flinch. She steps forward, her voice booming through the speakers. "Do not bow, do not scatter. This is their fire, but our light burns brighter." The crowd steadies, astonishing even the agents. Families lift their candles higher, their voices rising. "Our light burns brighter. Our light burns brighter." The attackers, stunned by the crowd's defiance, are tackled by federal agents before they can throw another bottle. The fires are smothered quickly, leaving only smoke. Elizabeth raises her candle again, her voice sharp. "You see, they tried fire and fire failed. They will keep trying and they will keep failing. Because fear burns out, but dignity burns on." The plaza erupts in cheers louder than the flames themselves. Livestream viewers flood the comments. "She didn't move. Fire failed. Dignity burns brighter." By morning, headlines blaze. Phase 3 foiled. Candles over fire. Commentators call it the defining moment of the movement, proof that no threat could extinguish it. Back at her farm that night, Elizabeth writes in her journal, "They brought fire, but fire dies. They brought fear, but fear fades. What remains is dignity, and dignity endures." Angela sits beside her, tears in her eyes. "One day, the fire might reach you." Elizabeth closes the journal softly. "Maybe, but by then, it won't matter, because the flame will already belong to everyone. Because arrogance thought fire would end the story. But instead, fire revealed how unbreakable dignity had become." The images of Riverton Plaza burning briefly under Molotov cocktails spread across the world overnight. But it isn't the fire that captures headlines. It's the sight of Elizabeth Warren standing firm, candle raised, while flames danced behind her. One commentator calls it the picture of defiance in an age of fear. Across America, the footage ignites more vigils. In Los Angeles, crowds block Hollywood Boulevard, holding candles aloft. In Chicago, families line the shores of Lake Michigan with lanterns. In New Orleans, choirs sing "Fear Never Wins" as candles glow under the shadow of St. Louis Cathedral. At FBI headquarters, Brooks slams a file onto Elizabeth's desk. "Director, we stopped them this time, but they're escalating faster. Phase 3 was fire. We have intel suggesting Phase 4 could be explosives. They want spectacle, something catastrophic." Angela, seated beside Elizabeth, looks pale. "Explosives? That's not just intimidation, that's mass destruction." Elizabeth folds her hands calmly. Fear is desperate when it realizes it's losing. They've lost every phase so far. Their desperation is proof of our strength. Brooks leans forward. "Ma'am, with respect, this isn't abstract. One mistake, one blind spot, and people die. We can't keep letting you stand in the open." Elizabeth meets his eyes firmly. "Brooks, listen to me. If I hide, fear wins. If I stand, even in danger, dignity wins. That's the equation, and I will not change it." The room falls silent. Angela sighs, shaking her head. "You're going to carry this until it kills you." Elizabeth answers softly, "Then I'll carry it until it lives in everyone else." The following Friday, Riverton Plaza prepares for yet another vigil. Flyers online call it the Night of Defiance. Families from across the country arrive, filling every hotel in the city. Reporters predict it will be the largest gathering yet. Security is tight. Drones circle overhead. Federal agents scan rooftops. Bomb squads sweep the area repeatedly. Still, a sense of unease lingers. Everyone knows the extremists are planning something. As night falls, the plaza glows brighter than ever. Candles stretch as far as the eye can see, a sea of flames united against the dark. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her presence instantly commanding silence. "They promised us endings again and again," she begins, her candle raised high. "They promised smoke, fire, and now more threats. But every promise they make is a lie, because what do we know?" "Fear never wins," the crowd shouts back. "That's right, fear never wins. Tonight we prove it again, not with anger, not with violence, but with light." The chants swell. "With light, with light." Suddenly, a loud bang erupts near the edge of the plaza. The crowd gasps, children scream. Agents rush toward the sound, weapons drawn. Smoke rises from a dumpster where a crude explosive fizzled out. Brooks shouts into his radio, "Device neutralized! Contain the perimeter!" Masked figures scatter from the alley, tackled swiftly by agents and veterans. The plaza teeters on the edge of panic. Elizabeth doesn't move. She steps forward, her voice cutting through the fear. "You see, they tried again. They tried to scare us with fire, now with explosions." But what happened? The crowd steadies, chants rise louder than the echoes of the blast. "Fear failed! Fear failed!" Elizabeth lifts her candle higher. That's right. Fear failed again. It will always fail. Because fear burns itself out, but dignity endures. The cheers are deafening. Families lift candles, live streams surge into the tens of millions. Hashtags trend worldwide. Hashtag fear failed. Hashtag dignity endures. By morning, headlines blaze, Phase 4 foiled, candle over blast. Commentators declare it proof that the extremists are out of moves, their plans collapsing as the movement grows stronger. Back at the farm, Angela clings to Elizabeth, trembling. "Every week I think it's the last. Every week you prove me wrong. But one day you might not." Elizabeth strokes her sister's hair gently. "Then remember this. If one candle goes out, millions more will keep burning. That's what they'll never understand." She opens her journal and writes, "They tried explosions, but explosions fade. They tried chaos, but chaos clears. What remains is dignity, and dignity multiplies. Because arrogance thought fire and bombs could end the story. But every spark they lit only proved how unstoppable dignity had become." The failed explosion attempt at Riverton Plaza dominates the headlines for weeks. News anchors replay the footage endlessly. A crowd on the brink of panic, federal agents neutralizing the device, and Elizabeth Warren standing tall on the stage, her candle burning steady. Commentators call it the night dignity outshone destruction. In schools across the country, teachers show clips of Elizabeth's speeches. Children repeat her words like mantras, "Fear never wins," and "Dignity endures." Families light candles in their living rooms each Friday evening, transforming vigils into a national ritual. But inside FBI headquarters, the mood is anything but celebratory. Brooks slams a new report on the conference table. They're calling it Phase 5. Online chatter is exploding, no pun intended. They've failed at smoke, fire, and bombs. Now they're talking about blood. Angela's face drains of color. Blood? What does that mean? Brooks grimaces. It means they're planning something personal, a direct strike at the director herself. Elizabeth sits at the head of the table, her expression calm. Then let them try. They've aimed at me since the beginning, and every time they miss, their cause collapses further. Angela snaps. You can't just shrug this off. You've turned into the symbol of this entire movement. If they hurt you, it could devastate everything. Elizabeth meets her eyes steadily. Angela, listen to me. If they hurt me, the movement doesn't die, it multiplies. Because dignity isn't mine to carry alone. It belongs to everyone who lights a candle, everyone who chants in the plazas, everyone who refuses to bow. The room falls silent. Brooks shakes his head. You make it sound poetic, director, but this is life or death. Elizabeth replies softly, life or death doesn't scare me. Living without dignity does. That Friday, Riverton Plaza glows brighter than ever. Families fill the square, choirs sing, veterans line the perimeter. Reporters call it the largest vigil yet. Overhead, drones stream the scene to millions across the globe. Elizabeth steps onto the stage. The crowd hushes instantly, waiting. She raises her candle high. They said explosions would silence us, but what do we say? Fear failed, the crowd roars. They said fire would scatter us, but what do we say? Fear failed. That's right, fear always fails. Tonight, we prove again that dignity burns brighter than destruction, louder than chaos, stronger than fear. The chants rise. Fear failed. Dignity stands. But amid the cheers, Brooks' earpiece crackles. A voice hisses. Suspicious movement, north perimeter. Possible shooters. Brooks stiffens, signaling to his agents. Snipers on rooftops adjust their sights. Veterans in the crowd move families toward safety. The plaza teeters on the brink. Elizabeth notices the tension but doesn't falter. She steps closer to the microphone, her voice booming. Do not bow, do not scatter. Their threats are nothing but shadows, and shadows vanish in the light. The crowd steadies, candles raised higher. The chants grow louder, drowning out the fear. Shadows vanish, shadows vanish. Agents move swiftly, tackling two masked men before they can raise their weapons. The crowd erupts in cheers as they are dragged away in handcuffs. Elizabeth raises her candle again. You see, they tried blood tonight. They tried to spill it. But what happened? Fear failed, the crowd screams back. That's right. Fear failed again. Fear will always fail. Because dignity doesn't bleed, it endures. Phones capture the moment, live streams exploding with comments. She didn't flinch. Fear failed again. Dignity endures. By morning, headlines blaze. Phase 5 foiled, dignity stronger than ever. Editorials praise Elizabeth as the calm in the storm. Back at her farm, Angela clings to her sister, trembling. They had guns pointed at you. Do you understand how close that was? Elizabeth holds her gently. Close doesn't count, Angela. What counts is that dignity stood, and it will keep standing. That night, she opens her journal and writes, They tried to spill blood, but blood feeds roots, and roots grow. Tonight, fear failed again. Tonight, dignity endured. Because arrogance thought bullets could end the story. But every bullet missed, because dignity had already won. The night after the attempted shooting, Washington, D.C. feels like a city on edge. Federal buildings are bathed in floodlights, police cruisers patrol every block, and news anchors speak in urgent tones. Yet amidst the tension, a single phrase dominates every broadcast. Fear failed again. At FBI headquarters, Elizabeth Warren convenes her senior staff. Brooks paces in front of a screen displaying mugshots of the two men arrested at the vigil. Extremist cells are fracturing, he says grimly. Some are running, others are doubling down. They're calling last night a setback, not a failure. They've already announced Phase 6. Angela shakes her head in disbelief. Phase 6? How many phases do these people think they can invent? Elizabeth leans forward, her voice calm. As many as it takes until they realize numbers don't defeat principles. Their phases are finite. Our dignity is not. Brooks snaps back. Director, they nearly killed you last night. Do you understand how close that was? Elizabeth meets his gaze. I do. But if I hide, if I let fear cage me, then they win without firing another shot. And that is a victory I will never give them. Across the country, vigils swell larger than ever. In New York, Times Square glows with candles, chants echoing off skyscrapers. In Dallas, veterans march with lanterns held high. In Seattle, children trace Elizabeth's words in chalk. Shadows vanish in the light. Reporters call it a cultural revolution. Meanwhile, Officer Mark sits in prison, watching the news from a flickering TV. His cellmate chuckles. That's the woman you pulled a gun on? She's bigger than the president now. Mark scowls, turning away, but the truth gnaws at him. His arrogance has become the spark for a movement he cannot stop. Back in Washington, Elizabeth prepares to testify again, this time before Congress about the extremist threats. The hearing room overflows with cameras and reporters. Senators lean forward as she begins. They called it Phase 5, she says, her tone sharp. They brought guns into a plaza filled with families and children. They wanted blood. But they forgot one truth. Fear may fire bullets, but dignity cannot be killed. Fear failed again. Applause erupts from the gallery, unusual for a congressional hearing. The chair bangs the gavel for order, but the message has already spread. Hashtag surge, hashtag fear failed. Again, hashtag dignity cannot be killed. That night, Riverton Plaza fills once more. Families come not out of fear, but out of defiance. The square glows brighter than ever, chants echoing into the night sky. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her presence silencing the crowd. They tried bullets, they tried fire, they tried chaos, but every time they failed. Why? Because fear never wins, the crowd roars. That's right, fear never wins. Fear fades, fear dies. But dignity endures, and tonight, we prove it again. The cheers shake the plaza. Live stream numbers climb past 30 million worldwide. But in a dark warehouse outside the city, masked figures huddle once more. One slams his fist on the table. She's mocking us. Every word is a knife. If Phase 5 failed, then Phase 6 must succeed. No more half measures. Another mutters, what if she's right? What if fear can't win? The leader snarls, then we burn everything until she's wrong. Back at her farm, Elizabeth writes in her journal by candlelight. They think phases make them powerful, But phases are fragile. Numbers run out. Dignity multiplies. It cannot be counted down, only carried forward. Angela watches her write, tears in her eyes. Every week, I think they can't go further. And every week, they prove me wrong. Doesn't that terrify you? Elizabeth closes the journal gently. Of course it does. But courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is standing anyway, and standing is what I will do. She gazes out at the fields, lanterns left by neighbors flickering along the fence line. Each one feels like a promise, a reminder that she is not standing alone. Because arrogance thought bullets could silence her. But every attempt only gave her words more power, and her light more reach. The morning after Elizabeth Warren's congressional testimony, Washington buzzes with a new energy. Newspapers print her words across their front pages. Fear may fire bullets, but dignity cannot be killed. Editorials call her the voice of a generation. Late-night hosts joke that she should run for president, but beneath the humor lies a serious truth. She has become more than the FBI director. She has become a national symbol. At her farm, Elizabeth sits on the porch with Angela, sipping tea. Angela scrolls through her phone, shaking her head. Listen to this. Kids in California are reciting your words like pledges at school assemblies. A teacher in Chicago says the chalkboards are covered in "Fear never wins." Liz, you've started something you can't control anymore. Elizabeth sets down her mug. Good. That means it belongs to them now. That was always the goal. Meanwhile, Brooks convenes his team at headquarters. Maps and photos line the walls, pinned with red markers. We're tracking what they're calling Phase 6, he says grimly. They've failed at smoke, fire, and guns. Now they're talking about collapse. Our intel suggests infrastructure, bridges, power grids, maybe even government buildings. Angela looks alarmed. So it's not just about Elizabeth anymore. It's about crippling the country. Brooks nods. Exactly. They want to prove they can still strike. They think fear can reclaim ground. Elizabeth joins the briefing, her expression calm. Then let them try. Fear may collapse structures, but it cannot collapse resolve. Every attack only proves our strength. Brooks clenches his jaw. With respect, Director, resolve doesn't stop explosives. Elizabeth's tone sharpens. No, but resolve ensures their destruction never outlives our dignity. Across the country, vigils expand into mass marches. In New York, thousands flood across the Brooklyn Bridge, candles lighting the skyline. In Atlanta, families fill the streets, chanting, "Phases end, dignity stands." In Seattle, children float lanterns into the bay, their light reflecting across the water. Reporters call it the largest grassroots movement in decades. But in a warehouse outside Baltimore, extremists prepare Phase 6. Their leader slams a fist on the table. They mock us every time she speaks. This time we won't just scare them, we'll cripple them. Blueprints of bridges and transit systems spread across the table. The men nod grimly. Back in Washington, Elizabeth speaks at a university. The auditorium overflows, students packed shoulder to shoulder. She stands at the podium, candlelight projected behind her. They believe collapsing buildings will collapse our spirit, she says. But they forget. Spirit isn't built of steel or concrete. Spirit is built of courage. And courage does not crumble. The students rise to their feet, applauding thunderously. Phones capture every moment, live streams climbing into the millions. Hashtags trend. Courage does not crumble. Spirit over steel. That evening, Riverton Plaza glows once more. Families gather, their candles a defiant flame against the dark. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her voice ringing clear. They promised us collapse, but look around, are we collapsing? No, the crowd shouts. They promised us fear, but what do we say? Fear never wins. Then tonight we rise again, not in fear but in unity, not in collapse but in strength. Suddenly, Brooks' earpiece crackles. A voice hisses, "Suspicious package spotted under the north stage support. Evacuate immediately." Brooks' face pales. He signals frantically to agents. "Device under the stage. Move now!" The crowd gasps as agents rush forward, cordoning off the area. Bomb squads swarm, carefully extracting a crude explosive. For tense minutes, the plaza holds its breath. Then a muffled boom echoes from a safe distance as the device is neutralized. Elizabeth never leaves the stage. She raises her candle higher, her voice unshaken. You see, they tried collapse tonight, but collapse failed. Fear failed, and dignity stands taller than ever. The crowd erupts in chants. Collapse failed, dignity stands. By morning, headlines blaze, Phase 6 neutralized, spirit over steel. Analysts declare the extremists finished, their every attempt now a humiliation. At her farm, Angela clings to Elizabeth, trembling. You were standing on top of a bomb. Do you understand how close that was? Elizabeth holds her sister gently. Close doesn't matter, Angela. What matters is that it failed, and it will keep failing. That night, she writes in her journal, they tried collapse, but collapse crumbled. They tried fear, but fear fell. What remains is dignity, and dignity rises. Because arrogance thought it could break the ground beneath her. But instead, the ground rose higher, stronger than ever. The foiled bombing attempt at Riverton Plaza marks a turning point. For weeks, headlines replay the footage. Elizabeth Warren standing calm on the stage while bomb squads work beneath her. Commentators call it the night collapse itself collapsed. In living rooms, families light candles with new determination. In classrooms, children chant, "Fear never wins," before starting their lessons. Vigils are no longer weekly events, they are nightly rituals across the country. At FBI headquarters, Brooks paces the Situation Room. Phase 6 was collapse. They failed again, but chatter suggests they're not done. They're calling the next one Phase 7, flood. Angela frowns. Flood? What does that even mean? Brooks grimaces. We don't know yet. It could be literal, attacks on water systems, or symbolic like overwhelming chaos. Either way, they're desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. Elizabeth listens, calm as ever. Let them call it flood. Water can overwhelm, yes, but water also cleanses. If they bring a flood, dignity will rise like higher ground. Angela slams her notebook shut. Liz, stop turning everything into philosophy. They're trying to kill you. Elizabeth meets her gaze. And every time they fail, they kill themselves instead. Fear always drowns in its own flood. Meanwhile, across the country, the movement swells further. In San Francisco, tens of thousands march across the Golden Gate Bridge with candles. In Miami, boats line the harbor at night, lanterns glowing on the waves. In Kansas, farmers light fields with torches in solidarity. Reporters call it a sea of light. But in a warehouse on the outskirts of Philadelphia, extremists gather around a large map. Their leader snarls, "If fire, bombs, and bullets didn't work, we'll drown them in fear. We'll flood their plazas, flood their streets, flood their hope." One follower hesitates. But every time we try, they grow stronger. Maybe she's right. Maybe fear really can't win. The leader slams his fist. Then we make them drown before they prove it again. That Friday, Riverton Plaza prepares for its largest vigil yet. Families travel from across the nation, filling every hotel for miles. Reporters predict over 100,000 candles will glow that night. Security is tight. Bomb squads sweep the grounds hourly, drones hover overhead, and veterans line the perimeter. Still, unease lingers. As dusk falls, the plaza fills with light. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her candle raised. The crowd hushes instantly. They promised us collapse, she begins. Collapse crumbled. They promised us chaos. Chaos cleared. Now they promise us flood. But what happens to floods? They recede, the crowd roars. That's right. Floods recede. Floods vanish. But dignity stands like the mountain. Unmoved, unshaken, unbroken. The chants swell. Unmoved, unshaken, unbroken. Suddenly, chaos erupts at the south entrance. A truck barrels through barricades, water cannons mounted on its roof. Masked men spray high-pressure torrents into the crowd, trying to scatter families and extinguish candles. Screams echo as water soaks the square. Brooks yells into his radio, "Phase 7 initiated! Neutralize the vehicle!" Agents and veterans charge forward. The truck fishtails, but federal SUVs cut it off, ramming it to a halt. Armed men are dragged out, shouting in fury. Elizabeth never leaves the stage. Soaked but steady, she raises her candle, its flame miraculously unextinguished. Her voice booms through the speakers. "You see, they tried flood tonight. They tried to drown us. But look, our candles still burn. Our voices still rise. Floods recede. Dignity endures." The crowd erupts, chants rising louder than the water cannons. Floods recede. Dignity endures. Phones capture the moment instantly. Livestream comments flood in. Her candle didn't go out. Flood failed. Unbroken. By morning, headlines blaze. Phase 7 fails. Candle burns through flood. Editorials call it proof that nothing, fire, bombs, bullets, or floods, can break the movement. At her farm, Angela clutches Elizabeth, trembling. "You were standing against a truck, Liz. They could have killed you." Elizabeth strokes her sister's hair gently. "They could have drowned me, yes. But floods always recede. Dignity never does." That night, she writes in her journal, "They brought a flood, but water receded. They brought fear, but fear drowned. What remains is dignity, and dignity rises higher than tides." Because arrogance thought water could wash her away, but the flood only revealed how unshakable she truly was. The footage of the truck attack floods every television channel. Over and over, viewers watch torrents of water smashing into Riverton Plaza, families screaming, candles sputtering, until the camera cuts to Elizabeth Warren, drenched but unyielding, her single candle still burning. Commentators call it the flame that drowned the flood. In cities nationwide, people replay the clip on their phones. Children gasp in awe. Parents whisper to their kids, "See, that's what strength looks like." Across social media, hashtags explode, #flood failed, #unbroken flame, #dignity rises. At FBI headquarters, Brooks storms into the briefing room, his face hard. Phase 7 is over, but chatter online is worse than ever. They're calling it Phase 8, blackout. Angela stiffens. Blackout? You mean the power grid? Brooks nods grimly. Exactly. They're planning cyber attacks and sabotage. If they can't scatter us with bombs or floods, they want to plunge cities into darkness. Elizabeth sits calmly at the head of the table, candle beside her. Then let them try. Darkness has never beaten light. Blackouts never last. Brooks slams his fist. Director, you keep turning this into poetry, but this is infrastructure. Hospitals, airports, millions could be at risk. Elizabeth meets his eyes. And millions will stand anyway. They've seen bombs, bullets, and floods fail. They'll see darkness fail too. That night, news of the planned blackout spreads, stoking fear. Families stockpile flashlights and batteries. Reporters warn of potential chaos. But as dusk falls Friday evening, people still gather at Riverton Plaza. The square glows with candles, anticipation thick in the air. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her voice carrying across the crowd. "They call this one blackout," she says. "They believe darkness will silence us. But what do we say?" "Light always wins," the crowd shouts. That's right. Darkness is temporary. Light is eternal. Tonight, even if the lights go out, our candles will shine brighter. The chants rise. Light is eternal. Light is eternal. Suddenly, at 8:47 p.m., the plaza plunges into darkness. The giant screens flicker off, streetlights die, and even the drones fall from the sky. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Brooks' voice crackles over radio. Blackout confirmed, grid failure, emergency generators offline. But in the darkness, one thing remains. Thousands of candles still glowing, steady and defiant. Elizabeth's voice booms through backup speakers, unshaken. You see? They took the power, they took the lights. But did they take our flame? No, the crowd roars, their candles swaying. Did they take our voices? Never. Then tonight we prove again. Blackouts fail, fear fails, dignity endures. The chants thunder. Blackouts fail, dignity endures. Phones capture the surreal image. An entire city square plunged into darkness, yet glowing with tens of thousands of candles. Live streams explode, viewers writing, "This is history." Darkness failed. Fear lost again. Hours later, power is restored, but the image of that night lingers. Commentators declare it the defining moment of the movement, not technology, not electricity, but candles defeating darkness. By morning, headlines blaze, Phase 8 neutralized, candles over blackout. At her farm, Angela bursts into tears. They cut the power to an entire city, Liz. Do you understand what they're willing to do just to break you? Elizabeth embraces her gently. Yes, but power lines snap. Grids fail. Darkness fades. What they'll never understand is that dignity doesn't depend on wires or switches. It burns here, she taps her chest, and here, she gestures to the horizon where lanterns from neighbors glow. That night, she writes in her journal, they tried blackout, but blackout failed. They tried darkness, but darkness lost. What remains is dignity, and dignity shines. Because arrogance thought darkness could swallow the light, but the blackout only proved how unstoppable the flame had become. The blackout attempt becomes the most replayed moment of the movement, Clips of Elizabeth Warren standing in total darkness, her candle glowing as tens of thousands chant, "Blackouts fail, dignity endures," spread like wildfire. Commentators call it, "The night candles defeated the grid." Across the country, communities embrace the symbolism. In Los Angeles, residents turn off their lights intentionally one evening, standing on rooftops with candles to recreate the moment. In Boston, church bells ring while congregations chant, "Light is eternal." Even abroad, cities from London to Sydney hold solidarity vigils. At FBI headquarters, Brooks stands before a map littered with red pins. Phase 8 failed, but chatter suggests Phase 9 is in motion. They're calling it silence. Angela frowns. Silence? What does that mean? Brooks explains, they want to shut down communication, hacking cell towers, jamming signals, cutting internet lines. If people can't live stream, they think the movement will die. Elizabeth sits at the table, candle burning beside her as always. Let them try. Silence is their weapon, but it will fail too. Because silence cannot stop truth. It only makes it louder when it returns. Angela throws up her hands. Liz, you can't keep brushing this off. They're escalating every week. Elizabeth turns to her gently. And every week, they fail harder. That's the pattern, Angela. That's what we cling to. Friday arrives, and Riverton Plaza swells once more. Families fill the square, candles glowing like stars. Reporters warn viewers, communication outages are expected. Elizabeth steps onto the stage. The crowd hushes instantly. They call this one silence, she begins. They believe that if our voices are cut, our movement ends. But what do we say? Silence fails, the crowd roars. That's right, silence fails, because silence cannot erase truth. Truth lives in us, and tonight, even if every signal dies, our voices will not. As if on cue, cell service drops. Phones freeze, live streams cut off. Gasps ripple through the plaza as people realize they've been severed from the outside world. But Elizabeth raises her candle higher. They think silence can end us. Then let's answer them with something they cannot block. With sound. The crowd erupts in chants so thunderous they shake the plaza. Fear never wins. Fear never wins. Families clap in rhythm, choirs sing, drums pound. Even without cameras, the sound carries across the city, echoing down streets and alleys. Residents open windows, joining in. Bells ring from churches, horns blare from cars, until the entire city hums with defiance. Brooks listens through radio static, shaking his head in awe. They cut the signals, but they only made it louder. After an hour, service is restored. Phones reconnect, live streams resume, flooding the internet with delayed videos of the chants. Viewers gasp at the sheer power of the sound. Hashtags trend instantly. Silence, failed, voices rise. Unstoppable. By morning, headlines blaze. Phase 9 backfires, silence amplified voices. Analysts declare that the extremists' strategy has collapsed completely. Every attempt now only fuels the movement further. At her farm, Angela hugs Elizabeth tightly. They cut us off from the world, Liz. I thought for a moment we were alone. Elizabeth strokes her sister's hair softly. We were never alone. Silence proved it. Our voices don't need wires or screens. They live here. She presses Angela's hand to her chest. That night, Elizabeth writes in her journal, they tried silence, but silence failed. They tried to cut the wires, but truth traveled without them. What remains is dignity, and dignity echoes. Because arrogance thought muting the voices would end the song. But silence only amplified the sound of millions rising. The aftermath of Phase 9 reverberates across the nation. News anchors replay the footage of Riverton Plaza shaking with chants even as live streams cut out. One commentator calls it, "The night silence screamed." Another says, "They tried to mute the movement, but they only turned up the volume." In cities everywhere, communities imitate the moment. In Chicago, when the clock strikes 8, neighborhoods intentionally switch off Wi-Fi and cell service, then gather to chant in the streets. In Denver, church choirs perform without microphones, their unamplified voices carrying across blocks. Across the Atlantic, Londoners hold a silent vigil where tens of thousands stand in silence for 1 minute, then erupt into thunderous chanting. At FBI headquarters, Brooks studies intelligence reports with grim determination. Phase 9 was silence. It failed. Now chatter suggests Phase 10. They're calling it storm. Angela leans forward. Storm? What does that mean? Brooke sighs. It's vague, but context suggests physical chaos, violent mobs, simultaneous attacks, anything to overwhelm order. They want to drown the movement under raw violence. Elizabeth listens quietly, candle glowing beside her. Storms rage, yes, but storms pass, and when they do, the sky clears. They cannot stop the dawn. Angela snaps, Liz, you can't just keep turning their threats into metaphors. These are armed men planning violence. Elizabeth answers firmly, and every armed man who's tried has failed. Storms end, Angela. Dignity does not. Friday arrives. Riverton Plaza prepares for another gathering, dubbed the Vigil Before the Storm online. Families arrive earlier than usual, some nervous but resolute. Veterans and agents line the perimeter, scanning the crowd with sharp eyes. As dusk falls, the square glows again, a galaxy of candles. Elizabeth steps onto the stage. They promise us a storm, she begins. They think lightning and thunder will scatter us. But what happens after every storm? The sun rises, the crowd shouts. That's right, the sun rises, the light returns. And tonight, we rise before the storm even begins. The chants swell. We rise, we rise. Suddenly, from multiple streets surrounding the plaza, groups of masked agitators surge forward. They throw bottles, ignite fireworks, bang metal pipes against the ground. Chaos erupts as the storm begins. Brooks shouts into his radio, "Storm initiated! Contain every entrance!" Agents clash with rioters, veterans lock arms to shield families, and the square shakes with noise. Elizabeth doesn't move. She steps closer to the microphone, her voice ringing out over the chaos. Do not bow, do not scatter. This is their storm, but storms pass. The crowd steadies. Families lift candles, chanting louder than the thunder of fireworks. Storms pass, storms pass. Agitators push harder, but every attempt is met with unity. Parents guide children to safety. Veterans absorb blows without flinching. Choirs sing above the noise. Agents swiftly dismantle the mobs, dragging instigators away in handcuffs. Within minutes, the storm fizzles into nothing but smoke and echoes. Elizabeth raises her candle higher. You see? They brought a storm, and the storm passed. Fear passed. But our light remains. Dignity remains. The plaza erupts in cheers louder than the chaos that came before. Hashtag surge, hashtag storms pass, light remains, dignity forever. By morning, headlines blaze, Phase 10 neutralized, storm passes, dignity stands. Commentators call it proof that the extremists are exhausted, their phases collapsing one by one. At her farm that night, Angela clings to Elizabeth, trembling. Every week they bring something bigger. Fire, bombs, guns, floods, silence, storms. How long can this go on? Elizabeth holds her gently. As long as they believe fear can win, but fear cannot win. Fear burns out. Fear drowns. Fear fades, and dignity remains. She opens her journal, writing by candlelight. They brought a storm, but storms end. They brought thunder, but thunder fades. What remains is dignity, and dignity shines after the rain. Because arrogance thought storms could scatter her, but the storm only proved that her light was the dawn waiting beyond the clouds. The so-called storm fades into nothing but broken glass and scattered smoke. News outlets replay the moment Elizabeth Warren's voice thundered over the chaos. Storms pass! Analysts call it the tipping point, the night the extremists lost not only their strategy, but their last shred of credibility. Across the country, communities respond with greater strength. In Los Angeles, residents stage a sunrise march after an early morning vigil. In Chicago, children paint murals of candles pushing back storm clouds. In Atlanta, choirs gather downtown, singing Fear Never Wins while rain pours, their voices rising above the thunder. At FBI headquarters, Brooks scans new intel. His jaw is tight. They're not done. They're calling it Phase 11, Ashes. Angela frowns. Ashes? What does that even mean? Brooks sighs. Our analysts think it's symbolic. Fires meant to leave destruction behind. They want to burn symbols, landmarks, anything tied to this movement. Elizabeth, sitting at the head of the table, lifts her candle and says quietly, Ashes feed roots. Fire may destroy, but ashes make soil richer. If they bring ashes, they only prepare the ground for more growth. Angela shakes her head, exasperated. Liz, you talk like a poet while they're planning arson. Elizabeth meets her eyes firmly. And every time they plan destruction, they fail. Ashes will fail too. Friday arrives and Riverton Plaza fills again. Families clutch candles beneath a calm night sky. Reporters dub the gathering the Vigil of Renewal. Elizabeth steps onto the stage. Her voice cuts through the night. They promised ashes. They promised ruin. But ashes are not the end. They are the beginning. Tonight, we prove again. Fear fails, dignity rises. The crowd chants back, fear fails, dignity rises. Suddenly, flames erupt at the far edge of the plaza. Rioters toss firebombs at banners and tents. Screams ripple through the crowd. Firefighters rush forward. Agents chase the attackers. Veterans form lines to shield families. Elizabeth doesn't move. She raises her candle higher, her flame steady against the blaze. Do not bow, do not scatter. Fire fades, ashes feed growth. The crowd steadies, chants swelling louder than the crackle of flames. Ashes feed growth, ashes feed growth. Within minutes, the fires are contained. The attackers are dragged away. Families lift their candles again, cheering. Elizabeth's voice booms. You see, they tried ashes tonight, but ashes cannot bury us. Ashes nourish us. Fear fails again. The plaza erupts, chants echoing into the night sky. Phones capture the surreal image of Elizabeth standing before fading flames, her candle unwavering. By morning, headlines blaze. Phase 11 neutralized. Ashes feed growth. News anchors say, every escalation ends in failure. Every phase collapses into the same truth. Fear never wins. At her farm that night, Angela trembles as she sits beside Elizabeth. I thought the fire would spread. I thought this was it. Elizabeth places a steady hand on her shoulder. It wasn't, because fire consumes itself, and ashes remind us to grow stronger. She opens her journal, candlelight flickering over the page. They tried ashes, but ashes only made the ground fertile. They tried fire, but fire devoured itself. What remains is dignity, and dignity grows. Because arrogance thought flames would bury her. But fire only sowed the soil where her light could spread further. The night after the fires, the country holds its breath. Every news outlet, every broadcast, every front page carries the same images. Elizabeth Warren standing before the flames, her candle raised high, unshaken. Commentators call it, the night ashes gave birth to renewal. Across America, vigils erupt into something larger. They are no longer simple gatherings. They are mass movements. In Los Angeles, 1 million people march down Sunset Boulevard, candles in hand. In New York, Times Square glows brighter than Broadway lights, the crowd chanting in unison, fear never wins. In rural towns, families gather in fields, their lanterns forming constellations across the land. At FBI headquarters, Brooks delivers the latest intel. Phase 11 failed, and chatter shows they know it. They're calling their last move Phase 12. The end. Angela shivers. The end of what? Brooks' face is grim. The end of Elizabeth. They want to end her life. Silence fills the room, but Elizabeth only sits straighter, her candle burning beside her. Then let them try. They've promised ending since the beginning, and every ending has become a new beginning. This will be no different. Angela slams the table. Liz, don't you understand? They're going to keep coming until… Elizabeth interrupts softly but firmly. Until what? Until I bow? Until I hide? That's what they want, Angela. That's what fear demands. But dignity does not bow. Dignity does not hide. If they come for me, they'll only prove the truth one final time. Friday arrives. It is announced as the Vigil of a Nation. Riverton Plaza is not enough. Streets for miles overflow with people. Drone footage shows a sea of candles stretching beyond the horizon. Reporters estimate millions gathered in person, tens of millions watching online. Elizabeth steps onto the stage, her presence commanding silence from the ocean of light. She lifts her candle, her voice strong. They promised us the end. They promised us silence, fire, storms, floods, collapse, and fear. But what happened each time? Fear failed, the crowd roars back. That's right, fear failed. Fear always fails. Tonight, they promised us the end. But hear me now, there is no end to dignity. Dignity rises, dignity endures, dignity writes history. The chants thunder louder than ever before. Dignity writes history. Dignity writes history. Suddenly, chaos strikes. From a rooftop nearby, a masked gunman raises his weapon. Brooks shouts into his radio, Shooter spotted! Northwest corner! Snipers lock on, agents move, the crowd gasps. But before a shot can be fired, veterans in the plaza spot the glint of the weapon. They shout warnings, shielding families. Within seconds, federal agents storm the rooftop, tackling the gunman to the ground. The crowd erupts, not in panic but in chants. Fear failed! Fear failed! Elizabeth never flinches. She raises her candle higher, her voice cutting through the night. You see, even their final attempt, even their so-called end, failed. Fear promised endings, but dignity delivers beginnings. Fear dies, but dignity lives. The plaza roars, candles sway, chants echo into the heavens. The livestream count breaks records, surpassing 50 million worldwide. By dawn, headlines declare, final phase fails, dignity wins. Editorials proclaim the extremists defeated, their every plan reduced to ashes. Commentators call Elizabeth the unshakable flame. At her farm, Angela collapses into her sister's arms. It's over. It has to be over now. Elizabeth holds her gently. It is, not because they've stopped, but because we've proven they cannot win. Fear lost. Dignity rose. That is the final truth. She opens her journal for the last entry of this chapter of her life. Candlelight flickers across the page as she writes, They promised me the end. They promised fear would reign, but fear failed. Again and again, fear failed. And what remains, what will always remain, is dignity. This is not the end. It is the beginning. She closes the journal softly, watching the sunrise spread across her fields. Neighbors' lanterns glow faintly in the dawn, remnants of a night that changed a nation. Elizabeth whispers into the morning light, Fear never wins. Dignity writes history, because arrogance thought it could write her ending. But dignity picked up the pen and wrote the future instead.